All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Kitty Games podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am Josh Blazer, and joining me, my co-host, indie game developer currently working on the game Samurai Pig, Joshua Reyes. How are you doing?
I'm doing great today, my man. I'm actually excited to talk about this topic. It's kind of been on my mind for a while. It's existed kind of in the ethos in a while, and then it's also going to bring to light something very important that we are going to discuss today about game development. So I'm ready to rock.
Yeah. You may be hearing a slight hum in the background. That is my family doing some vacuuming in the distance. So hopefully that will stop in the next few minutes, or it may just be a forever vacuum, which would go well with our
Right,
topic. And hi,
right.
Amanda. Thanks for stopping by. So,
Forever vacuuming would be good, like for the topic that we're talking about, just an empty vacuuming.
yeah, true. So, in one of those strangeness about 2022, Duke Nukem Forever was released a second time this week, or should we say it was leaked, as it was revealed that the original build, or one of the original promotional builds for the game, this was in 2001, was leaked to the internet. It was confirmed by the creator, and people have been, of course, poring over every inch of it to see what they could find. Now, of course, this stands at a very stark contrast to the actual Duke Nukem Forever that was released in 2011, I believe, which makes me feel even older than I should. Let me see, when was
No,
it?
2011, 2011.
Yep,
Yeah,
it
that's when it came
was.
out.
And this, of course, with the original build, it's not done. I think Duke Nukem is missing eyeballs and stuff like that.
Wrong a model of him, and yeah, all kind of broken stuff. Yeah.
But from what people were saying, I was watching some footage of it, it didn't look bad. It looked like a solid FPS, again, being developed in 2001. And the thing that I think is very interesting about this, and we'll get your thoughts on this as well as the chat, it looks almost kind of like the in between of what we got from Half Life 1 to Half Life 2 in terms of like that kind of more organic level design. Like, it looked like they were really trying to push things forward with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that had to do with some of the engine changes. I know during the development they changed engines. Like the original Duke Nukem 3D was very limited in what you can do. And as they changed engines, and you could definitely feel the tide. I think this was right before the brown shooter. Was this a brown shooter era around there?
Brown shooter, I think that was Call of Duty, so that probably would have been like a few years later.
Later, right? So prior to that, so you could still like get a lot of color, a lot of pop, and they were really getting definitely pushing the boundaries with the engine. I think that's what they were really going with, the technology changes and working with what they could. A lot of cool physics stuff going on, interactions. Duke's always done that, so definitely like trying to push and expand upon things. For 2001, they were definitely pushing some boundaries for sure.
Yeah, and that's I think the thing that's very fascinating is that again, like is this build the be all end all FPSs? No, I mean again, like we've played plenty of shooters. I mean, there's still a lot going on right now, and we can certainly rant and rave about them for a few hours. But when we look at that period, before all the colors were sucked out of level design for a few years, it didn't look like it was going to be a failure. It looked like it was going to be another very solid entry in the Duke Nukem franchise. And someone was talking about the glass physics and how like show like you can shoot the glass or punch a glass and like broke mostly realistically. And again, it we like I think the phrase that we're going to repeat a lot here is for 2001. It looked very impressive, and I think there's another topic we could certainly rant about with just how much technology has changed game dev in the
Right,
past 30
right.
years. But again, like the late 90s, early 2000 to like 2010, it's like going from like horse and buggy to a speed car or to a sports car in terms of how much engine technology and game dev
Right.
has evolved.
Yeah, like we were talking about on the previous podcast, like getting into game dev now is easier than before.
Hmm.
Back then, literally they had to create their engines or they were working with their engines. Now they have their choice, right? A studio can go we're not going to reinvent the horse and buggy or use a horse and buggy. We're going to go ahead and get this Lambo that's already done, tested in games like Fortnite or tested in other. I can't think of a unique game at the moment, but just the engine, the ability for devs to create with the tools out there is just far beyond what was available during that time at 2001. And again, extrapolating what they were able to do like back then and what they were trying to accomplish, and now, from then to now, it's still quite amazing.
Yep, and like the part that I was watching was like the motorcycle section that looked just very much like a lot of noise going in the background. It looked a lot like the hoverboat section that we would see in Half-Life 2 like 3 years later.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So yeah, and like you said, they were ahead of the curve. I remember like all kind of they had that was it the drawing board? Like I mean no one's ever seen that before. Like back then you could like draw on this little chalkboard and things like that. All kind of wild interactivity. That I mean when that game came out, when I was seeing the demos of it, the 2001 demo, I was really like blown away by it. I was excited for it. I was pumped and I thought again like you said, it was primed for a success. You would never believe from what you saw in 2001 that it would go to 2011 in development, and as I
Yep,
was researching, one of the things is there was like 4 or 5 studios involved in the development. You know, so that is definitely another thing to discuss about that before I forget that part.
definitely. And yeah, like excuse me, when you're like hitting stuff, or you're like pushing buttons, like with Duke's fingers. Like someone else commented that the first time we would see that in a retail game was Doom 3.
Yeah,
And Doom 3's release was
go. You can get it for me.
2004. Again, like it's very funny that like two like influential games like that was 2004. I was like a special, like a magical year for PC
Right.
games.
Yeah, there was a couple magical years.
Hmm.
98 was one of them also, I believe.
Yeah, you'll probably say 94. I think was another really good
94,
year.
definitely. Definitely. We'll have to do those best years of
There we go. There's another series you could do here. And with Duke Nukem Forever, like to Draken's comment there, yeah, like I played Duke Nukem Forever, the actual release of it, and it was just kind of meh. Like again, there will be of course hardcore defenders who will
for
defend it
sure.
to the death, as there are people who will hate it to the death. And to what Josh just said about having like multiple studios come in, that like again like for people who don't know the story of Duke Nukem Forever's development, it is certainly an interesting one. Like this was again before we really got crazy with like internet discussions and online game journalism, but it probably would have had a similar treatment to BioWare's Anthem Fallout in terms
Right.
of what the heck happened to this game.
Right. Definitely. And yeah, that's an interesting point because like we're talking about like 96 is when it was announced the year of Duke Nukem 3D. So from 96 to 2011, like if you searched, you would see like development still going on from this game constantly the whole time. It was being worked on from a different studio or a different, but it was constantly being worked on. A very strange outlier in game dev.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of lessons we can glean from it, especially again the focus of our talk for today. That you really can see like there are like multiple different builds, multiple different stories that came out about it. And the one thing that I always like heard that still like resonates with me is that they kept changing the game. Like there were stories of the lead developer who like anytime he would see a new mechanic, a new piece of tech, new whatever, he was like, okay, we need to put this in Duke Nukem Forever. And we can see that like one of the big differences between Duke Nukem Forever, the 2001 and 2011 build, was in the 2011 build, I think Duke could only hold like two weapons. He had like
Yeah.
regenerating health. Like again, it felt like if we looked at the original 2001, this was a game that was kind of set to kind of redefine or push FPSs forward. While the 2011 just felt like, here's us
Yeah.
taking as many things as we saw somebody else did and put into our game.
So the actual 20, I'm not sure. I got you didn't verify this with me, but the actual 2011 release. So Gearbox took over, I believe, in 2010,
Mm,
and they got it finished, or they pushed the final part of the year and had it released in a year.
mm,
So my when I was thinking is maybe Gearbox was taking like similar technology they had maybe from their other shooters and just kind of like putting it together in a year and getting something out the door to try and cut losses on it. I mean,
yep.
I couldn't imagine the losses that they were incurring from that IP over 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something that I think we can certainly talk a lot about in terms of what not to do when it comes to game dev. And I think one of the more salient points I kind of want to explain or extrapolate for people watching is that it very much seems like a case of management failing.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
so much, the rank and file or the people in the weeds working on this game. And the unfortunate truth is that this can happen. It's one of the main reasons why so many developers kind of get out of the AAA space. Is
Yeah.
that when you have, four or five or even just one person managing 50, 100, hundreds of people,
Hmm.
that power can easily go to someone's head, or they can just keep messing with that formula. When you're
Hmm.
an indie dev and it's you and maybe either by yourself or maybe with a team of 5 or 10, it's far smaller, and you also don't have to worry about that ego trip that I think comes into play.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, indie studios can definitely be like, I've discussed this many times. Like, that's one of the key points that we're able to shift and change.
Mm-hmm.
But the point I want to get back to you, though, Josh, that you mentioned about Duke Nukem and the management and changing, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
get see a new feature and this and that and the rank and file. So kind of what happens is we get like in the AAA, you have someone that's above everyone else, and when they're working, they'll work on stuff maybe for a feature for months, years, and then it just gets chopped. And you can imagine the morale that would do for you, right? If you're pouring your
Mm-hmm.
heart and soul into like this certain mechanic about Duke Nukem, or just the texture art, and then it's just you know what, we're switching to a different engine, and so
Mm-hmm.
basically all the coding, everything you've done is just thrown away, right? And so like this would decimate a team. This would decimate people's ability to like really care. So like one of the key components in game dev is passion, right? And people caring for it and loving the product.
Mm-hmm.
And when you condense it down to this, and when it's all issues and all politics and poor management and things like that, you're not going to really get a good product in the end. And
Mm-hmm.
everyone just suffers.
And what you just said about having to change engines or being forced to change engines, that's a really important parallel to Anthem. As the story goes, that BioWare was kind of pressured or forced by EA to use their Frostbite engine for Anthem's
Ah,
development, and nobody of us two ever worked with it. Nobody knew what it was all about, and it led to further issues like that. And now I'm thinking that I probably should have put an Anthem character in the thumbnail. I'll have to
yeah,
do that
was
for the I'll have to do that for the recorded version.
do the update. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, just like from personal experience, and we can even just say like engines have also like incremental upgrades, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
Unreal 4.20, Unreal 4.3, or et cetera. Like, and there's small upgrades, right? And each upgrade just in that engine will provide problems and issues, right? C++ code that I might have written is not going to work in the newer updated version. That's like minor stuff. So that like I've had setbacks in game development set me back weeks, like switching to an upgraded engine, trying to get things that I had working before, working in a new one, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
if we extrapolate that and we go to here's a whole team that's never seen this engine before, learn this engine, and also build the game, I don't know what you really are going to expect. Most of the time, people are going to be learning how to make things okay. The character moves now. That's a lot to ask from a team again, right?
Yeah. And again, it sounded like from watching and the interviews that went out that they never really figure out or put their finger on this is what we want Duke Nukem Forever to be. And a lot of that,
Right.
excuse me, again, came from the director saying, I want to turn into this. I want to add that. I want to keep doing that. And one of the things that we've said many times over is that you need to have your core gameplay loop set and then locked in stone. Because you
Right.
change that, you change every system that gets attached to it.
Change the entire game, right? And you can be like, oh, well, I'm just adding this, but you've changed everything, like you said, that's attached to it. And not only that, we're not talking about systems. We're also talking about your code, your
Mm-hmm.
underneath, everybody that's working with you, level designers, sound designers. How does it affect everything else in the game? And then all of a sudden, you had a game that was working fine. I want to add in this feature, and everything is broken. The game no longer works.
Yeah.
You, you know?
Yep, like here's a very simple example. If you go from allowing the player to equip multiple weapons to only be locked down to two, well, suddenly you need to completely rebalance every stage and
Right,
rebalance every weapon drop and how
right,
enemies behaved, everything. So
right,
basically, everything that you did balance wise up until that point, you
right,
throw it out and you gotta start right back again at zero.
right.
And I think Joshua's having a out of body moment because he's working on an action game right now, thinking of that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, right now, like in my game, I'm not the weapon count isn't super high just for
Hmm.
that reason.
Yeah,
Because if I were to all of a sudden throw in, like if I started with 16 and took it all out, it's just all broken, right? So yeah,
yeah.
I think I'm back in my body now, though.
Okay.
Let's continue.
This isn't the first time I gave Josh an out body
I
experience.
was
We'll see
gonna
how many
say.
more of those come as we do these shows. And again, like you can see these parallels to these big failures like Anthem in terms of from the outside it's like watching a car crash. How
Yeah,
did this not happen? But it's very hard when you're in the weeds, when you are working on these games, to see these issues. And again, another major point about this is also a really good example of why multi-year development is not a solid game plan.
yeah.
And
There's clearly an issue, right? If
mhm,
it's taking that long to develop, there's a big problem. And like you stated earlier, you didn't decide what you really wanted to do with the game or what the plan was. Core gameplay wasn't put in place, right? And that's where you end up. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
go ahead.
But yeah, as I was saying, like when you have these multiple year projects, as Joshua just said, like it will most often not recoup that investment.
Yeah,
And more important, I think, and to clarify for any developers watching, when we talk about multi year development, we're talking full time development.
yeah.
Because there are indie devs who will work on games in their part time or, as something they do when they have like an hour or two to kill a week. If that game takes 5, 10 years, we're not, ignore this. If you're working, 9 to 5, 7 days a week or 5 days a week, and it's taking you 5, 8, 10 years, that's a big problem.
Massive problem. And we really need to analyze what's going on. Like, what are you, if you're constantly changing the game, adding features, um, why are we doing this? Why are you doing this to your game? And I think the main problem is you just planning, like forethought ahead and make sure you know what you're going to do and just execute it. And like, I've been a big proponent. I'm trying to crack this code. I'm a huge
Mm-hmm.
proponent. I want to make very small game development cycles. Like, I'm talking wild, like, I'm talking 3 months, 6 months, like 9 months. I really want to bring down game development to a smaller cycle. I think
Mm-hmm.
we're getting there. And I think we really have to, like, just because of the engine technology, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things that would have taken a lot of time before. I'd have to hire a math guy to help me with my rendering or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. None of that I have to worry about now. Um, so basically, I think a shorter game development cycle is
Mm-hmm.
really what we need to be aiming for. I think that's a big, longer, especially for indie devs, since we're talking indie devs,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? You can't be working on this one thing if you're working full time for that long because every day that you're working on it, you kind of got to think about it, you're losing, right? You're
Yep.
kind of losing.
Every day you have utilities to pay, you have employees to pay.
Exactly.
And as a very shocking announcement for people watching, when you're working on a game, it's not bringing in money.
No.
And I know that's a big reveal. I'm sure a lot of people are, aghast at that reveal. But it is, again, something you need to consider as an indie developer or as anyone who's doing this as a business. Do I spend 3 years working on this experimental game that may or may not pay off? Or do I spend 18 months on something that, I know it's not going to make, 10 million copies,
Right.
but I know that it's something I can do, it's something people want to play, and I can, add this to my, my resume
Portfolio.
or my portfolio.
Resume. Exactly. And like that's the perfect point. Like if you're thinking, oh, I got to get my perfect game and it has to be
Mhm.
perfect and perfect and perfect, yeah, again, that's going to lead 3 years, 4 years, and this and that. But if instead we release something that okay, it's not going to sell that well, but you get it out and that's a game published that you've gotten out, one game, right? And then you can start working on your next game, get that one done, and you just get more on your portfolio. You get better, you'll get more experience, you'll start getting more clout. You know what I mean? So it's just instead of taking 3 years, during those 3 years, you could have released, I don't know, 3 games, right? So that's a big difference. So you say, okay, here's a game developer that's released 3 years, one that's still working on one.
Yeah. And I know somebody will throw in the comment of, you know, I want to make sure this game is good. I don't want to release a bad game. And again, that is certainly a valid point. But
Sure.
there is certainly, I think, a good length for a game. And again, when we talk about this from a AAA space, when you are building games like Elden Ring size, like Horizon Zero Dawn or whatever size, that takes a lot of time, and it's why these studios have millions of dollars of budget. For a smaller developer, if you're just working on, like, let's say a 20 level platformer or a 8 to 10 hour long RPG, that should not realistically be taking you 5 years, 10 years of development.
Not at all. Not at
And
all. I'm trying to find the how many people worked on Horizon. No, go. Sorry. Go ahead.
while you're doing that, and with something like with Duke Nukem Forever, and with a lot of these games that tend to balloon, again, it all goes back to what is the core gameplay loop? What can you do? And what Josh just said a minute ago, I think is very important to clarify or to say again that in the span of time that Duke Nukem Forever was in development, how many games could 3D Realms have put out in that time?
Yeah, big time, man. That's a big loss,
And
right?
this was a point that I was thinking about before we started. And it goes back to what we were saying last, I think it was either last week or the week before, in terms of how studios grow and iterate. That From Software didn't go from King's Field to Elden Ring. Mario didn't go from Super Mario World to Super Mario Odyssey. The studios that survive and thrive, they have those big name games, but you can track, the development, or you can track the growth of these studios. And with Duke Nukem Forever, again, in 11 years of time, engines change, game design philosophy changes, gameplay, what people expect changes. You could have done 4 or 5 different games experimenting or doing different things with them, and then create, the Duke Nukem Forever in 2011. But again, you can't skip, steps 2 through 5 and then go
Yeah.
step 1 start, step 6 profit.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's what I say. Start small, fail fast, fail often, and get your stuff out there, right? Get your
Hmm.
indie game. Get your Do me a favor if you're like listening and you haven't published your first indie game and you want to make it, get a game done in a month. Just come up with an idea, get it out and published on a month on itch. It doesn't matter if it's not any good or if it doesn't work. What it's teaching you is the whole game development cycle, and you'll learn a lot from that.
And I think that, again, is a very big point. The actual game dev side. Because
Yeah.
again, you can have the greatest program in the world, the best artist, your mind can be, Sid Meier, Hideo Kojima combined. But if nobody knows
Sweet.
how to organize a game, nobody knows how to put it together. It's just a bunch of, random parts, somebody throws on a lawn somewhere.
Right, exactly. Like we have so many different things that are working, so many like people, so many different disciplines that are working together. Like we said, I always bring up texture artists first for some reason. So we have
Mm.
texture artists, level designers, audio, the coders, the program. I could go on for localization, your lawyers, marketing, all that stuff, right? So there is a ton of stuff that goes into it. I lost my train of thought on that one. Josh, help me out here.
That with so much that can go into game dev like that, if you're not learning those processes, and I think that's
Yeah.
something that, again, like when we talk about kind of education and game dev, unless your teacher is forcing you to make prototypes on a frequent
Right.
basis, you're not going to really learn that. And even then, like a game jam, I don't think
No.
would apply here because a game jam is
No.
about 24 to 40 hours or maybe longer
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah, game jams. Okay, game jams are fun. Like the
Mm-hmm.
what I recommend game jams for is like networking and meeting people,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of maybe testing yourself at that point. Okay, what do I know? What can I do? Or what can I learn? But the most important thing, like when I lost my train of thought there, the most important thing is getting your game out, going through the game development cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and so you start to understand every little part of it, right? And so you release one game. Then the next time you release it, you're going to start learning more, right? You'll meet more people, you'll understand more, you'll talk more, you can expand it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Third game you put out, expand a little bit more. But just imagine if instead in those 3 months, those 4 months, or that 1 year, you're there marinating, redoing it, not posting
Mm-hmm.
things, not talking to people because you're scared, you want it to be perfect. Changing things constantly, that's just a perfect recipe for failure in vaporware.
Yep. And it's why we often see, I think, a lot of smaller developers tend to mess up. That they'll either never release that game, or they'll just keep changing it, and it never comes out. Or they may just keep releasing the same game. Like there's no growth or iteration. It's
Hmm.
just, my first game is this kind of platformer. The second game is just the same platformer. The third game is the same platformer.
Right.
And I mean, again, you can look at Mario. Again, like Super Mario 1, Super Mario Lost Worlds have different elements. And then Super Mario Bros. 3, just this insane jump in terms of
Yeah.
scale. And then that goes even further with World. And then again, if you think about it, they go from Super Mario World to Super Mario 64. Like, that, again, like that jump from 2D to 3D, you cannot understate how
That was
complex
big.
that was.
That was massive. Like we were at that time, we were literally figuring out how we want to control, right? How our controls, we had no idea. This is all set in stone now. Someone can pick up a controller, they know which way.
Mm-hmm.
Even back then, the cameras were messed up and
Mm-hmm.
different, and each game was doing things their own way because we didn't know what we were doing, right? We didn't know how the
Yeah.
camera would work, how players are going to perceive 3D. So that jump was in just wow. That was amazing.
And again, Nintendo got it almost perfect with their very first 3D game. Like that,
Right.
again, people, I think, tend to forget that Super Mario 64 was Nintendo's first 3D platformer, and it's still considered one of the best 3D platformers ever made.
Ever of all time. And it was the
Mm-hmm.
first, like we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
before. Sometimes the first is always just going to be the best, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very
And
first.
again, if you keep trying and you keep going over the same thing again and again, you're not really getting that knowledge. To bring this back to Anthem for a second, that again, BioWare went from making RPGs, very turn based, slow kind of combat systems, then saying, okay, let's make a 3D action multiplayer, shooter game. And for a company that has never done anything like that, it would be like going from saying, I'm going to drive a car to I'm going to race fighter jets now. The
Right.
skills translate, right?
Right. And that's one of the things like switching over like you're talking about. So how you feel about a developer like, say, like an indie dev that they're just making a platformer over and over again and just trying to iterate it and trying to get
Mhm.
their perfect platformer, right? That they're just continually making a platformer until they get the perfect one. How would you feel about that?
Again, I think if you're not learning from those lessons, if you're just repeating
Just
the
the
same
same
thing,
thing. Yeah.
it's not really doing anything. Like, you
Hmm.
need to show that growth. And
Right.
sometimes growth can be bad. Like, if you take your game so far out of left field that you lose all the marketing and support your other games get,
Yeah.
that's a problem. That was something that Chris and I were talking about on that like 10-hour podcast we did.
How did
That
you survive that one?
lots and lots of drinking. But that idea that, if you call your game XCOM and you turn XCOM into, let's say, a visual novel game, people are going to be deservedly annoyed. And that's why we
Yeah.
see people do the side stories, or they'll have, different branding, Mario Party, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And again, this is one of those many aspects of game dev that you have to learn, because people are not. I think this is another big point, that most people who teach game design, they're not teaching kind of like this side of game dev, the actual running a business side.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that is the very like yeah, you're going to business school and you're learning like okay again how to make the texture, what
Mhm.
resolutions work great, maybe memory management stuff like that. But the big thing about working with a team, like even solo, right? Understanding your scope, getting those things out the door, like what is worth it to you? Like all those things are things that you really kind of got to experience, or just listen to us and we'll help you out.
Yep, and I think it was either Draken or Rat's Tail brought up Owlboy. Let's see if I can find that link. Oh, here's Draken said this. And yeah, with Owlboy, like, this was a game that, again, it was in development for 10 years. And it looked, visually, it looked fantastic. But then when everyone started to play, it was like, yeah, it's a platformer. I played Super Meat Boy. I played Mario.
You
And
played it?
those. What was it?
Did you play Owlboy?
Yeah, I did.
How was it?
It was okay.
Eh,
Like,
yeah.
and I think, again, like, this is the thing, another major salient point for people to listen to. You will oftentimes never see the years that go into a game's design when you play it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, we've played games that had maybe like a 2 to 3 year dev cycle that were fantastic,
Amazing.
and we,
12 years. Terrible. Like,
yeah, and it's like, and you're just like sitting there going, how did somebody do this in 2 years,
years.
this in 8 years, and it just feels completely off. And
Right.
again, I think that goes back to all those little details that go into game dev. Being able to lock down your core gameplay loop, manage a team, get play testing done. Like, these aren't, magical aspects. These are just, the business side. And if they don't get done, your game is not going to succeed.
Right. Definitely. So get something out, get something prototype really quick, really fast. Get play testing. You know what I mean? Get it solid what you want to do. Get it in production quick, and then get going. You know what I mean? If okay, if you feel like you need to keep I'm steering directions and this and that, there's probably something wrong, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably recommend if you're starting to feel that way about a project, maybe just keep going forward and get it done and move on to the next one.
Yep. And again, there is no shame in just saying, I'm done. You
I'm
know,
done.
or just saying, this is our core gameplay loop, do or die, good or bad. This
Hmm.
is where I'm steering the ship,
Yeah.
and we're going to get this done, because it's
Yeah.
better to get a game out than
Yeah.
just say, well, maybe I'll just add this, maybe I'll change that, maybe I'll just keep
Hmm.
doing this, and this. And again,
Right.
like, we look at Duke Nukem Forever, that original 2001 build Like
Imagine
so,
if they would have released that like in 2020, 2002. That'd be amazing, right? Like
yeah,
in 1 year, they would have just got that. Because I seen the build and you watched it. I mean,
yeah.
you could have pieced that together in a year for sure, you know? And
Yeah. And
they would
like
have,
some of the original developers are commenting saying, "Oh, it doesn't look that good, or it doesn't look, doesn't look all that impressive." And I think there's
2001.
again that I think that's another aspect that it's hard when you're in the game's development to kind of see what other people say. Again, like I've
Yeah.
harped on the new players' experience until the cows come home. I think I have another rant after playing that Doom game about the new player's point of view, and it is, I think, a very important thing to understand that when you are looking at this game 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, no matter what, you're not going to have that same experience as somebody
Yeah.
who is looking at this game on a store page or
Mhm.
they're watching a YouTuber play it or something like that.
I got like real quick story. I had a buddy and he was working on combat or something like that. And he was adjusting values, right? And he was
Hmm.
testing it by himself for hours and hours and hours. And he said, "Yeah, this feels better. This feels better." Anyway, what he was adjusting wasn't changing anything. He was adjusting the wrong value. So the whole time he changed it in his head and it felt different, but nothing was changed.
Yeah.
Right? So you can get that lost in game development where you think you're making a change and you're not, or you are and you think you're not and you are, right?
Hmm.
So definitely you have to let other people take, like, you're making it, but you have to have other people, and again, release that game, get it out, and you'll get more feedback than just sitting there, just,
In
not
like a
releasing it.
cave for the next 10 years working
Exactly.
on this game. And again, there's nothing wrong with working on a game when you're part time. There's nothing wrong with
No problem.
saying, you know what, I need to take care of my family. I'm going to put this
Yeah.
aside for a year or two or
Yeah.
more. But
Hmm.
if you're saying that this is my product, this is what I'm basing my business on, if that product's not out there, it's not earning money.
Not earning money.
And to Pony's comment about there's a skill with saying that there's value in doing something within a time frame versus doing absolutely the best you can. And
Yeah.
again, like something
Oh,
that
well
we've.
point.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Good.
I was going to say, like, this is something that we've harped on before that your first game is not should not be your dream game because you don't have that knowledge base. Again, like going back to the From Software example, there is no way in heck they could have made Elden Ring in 1997 or 1998. They didn't have the technology, they didn't have the know-how, and they needed to build up their skills. And if you, yeah,
What you're saying, one of the things is you don't even know what you don't know when you're first starting out. So you have to get in there and start doing it and start refining it. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm. And when you can get games, when you can get into a good groove of releasing and making games and
Yeah.
improving on them,
Yeah.
people can see that change. They can see that evolution. And this was a point that Chris and I were talking about how studios that succeed, they develop this kind of like vibe or mood that goes into their games. That when you see a game from Nintendo or you see a game from Valve or Peak Blizzard, that
Kid Fox.
yeah, kind of the attitude that game is going to have. You know what that studio can do. You know what you're going to get.
Hmm.
Supergiant Games is another great example. They've
Yeah.
made four, I think, radically different games, but you know when you play a Supergiant game, you know, kind of like that aesthetic, that tone that you're going
Yeah.
to get.
They
Clay,
still all feel the same. Like
yeah,
but they're completely different. Like I was so blown away that they changed. Like they were able to change and still get it so good. Like on each one, and I think their development times were pretty short, right?
I think it's like 2 to 3 years, maybe a
Two
little
to
bit
three
more than
years.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, like these are games where you can always tell when a developer gets the idea early. When they figure out again what is
Right.
that core gameplay? What do I want this game to
Hmm.
be? Look at
Key point right there.
Yep.
Key point there is you get it done, and the whole time you're polishing that core the whole time, and you're just making it better instead of constantly changing the core and you're not polishing it,
Yeah.
right?
And I mean, there are extreme situations. Let's say you do work on this core gameplay loop, and all of a sudden it just stops. Like, let's say you can't do any more with it. It's just not working. You know, you're basically trying to fit every square peg you can imagine into a round hole. and it doesn't work, then
Yeah.
yes, at that extreme situation, you need to change it. You need to do a course correct. But you shouldn't be doing a course correct every 6 to 12 months. You shouldn't be having to keep making those adjustments. Because
Right.
again, you're losing time, you're losing work. And I think to a point Josh said earlier, you're losing morale. I
Yeah.
mean, how many people want to work on the same thing for 10 to 12 years of their lives?
No, they don't. And like the worst that has affected teammates is like when work that they're so proud of and something they've done and you have to cut it. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and that's due to or whatever poor planning, technology changes, just unforeseen changes. There's a lot of black hole in
Mm-hmm.
game development. There's just like you said, no one knows how long you worked on it, how hard you worked on it. That's not the point. So we want to get more efficient at it. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's a big thing. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
you you lose a lot of work, and so you need to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
uh you have like source control set up, you have proper team management, talk to everybody, talk to yourself if you're solo, make sure you got everything, all your ducks in order.
Yeah. And like we've said, when we see games that succeed, even if when they do things right, it can be a very small success and still be fantastic. Again, developers like Jake Burkett, Jeff
Yeah.
Vogue, Cliff Harris,
Hmm.
they go into it knowing that their game is not going to be the next Fortnite. It's not
Right.
going to be the next Among Us. So we can't
Right.
spend 6, 12 years on this game. And
Right.
again, we can certainly argue with Spireweb that they could do more in terms of their process. But again, it's always that risk. Do you spend extra time doing completely new game, do completely different art or aesthetic for your game? Will that bring in new people? And there's no easy answer for this because we can sit here and say, oh, if Jeff Vogue just switches to Unreal Engine 5 and makes all his RPGs look like Bioware, he'll make $20 million.
Right, everybody. You know what? He might sell a few just because of his name, right? If,
Yeah.
if 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 he tweeted he went to UE5, he might get a few buys for that, right? Uh,
But
but
again,
yeah,
yeah, like
good.
I follow Jake Burgett on Twitter, and he's talked a lot about, and the same goes for Chris Park, in
Hmm.
terms of understanding the business and the game dev side.
Yeah. For example, okay. For example, let's say okay, you've already gotten a few games in your belt, and you say, okay, I want to get a little serious now. Let's do our first project. So what you want to do is you want to do research, right? You want to check the market, see what the market's like. And I'm not big on following trends, right? As what goes around comes around. You got to be quick, you got to be fast, you got to be nimble. But like, see what the market is, and okay, average game that does about this sells that much, right? So then think, okay, well, how much, if I'm going to sell this much, think about your sales. And from there, think about how much time you need to work on the game, right? And break it down. Okay, well, I'm only going to sell the biggest game only sells that much. So cut yours in half. And then from there, you can go from there, right? You can say, okay, well, I need this month, 1 month to prototype, 2 months production. And then as long as I can get it out and make at least half the sales something, I'll be okay. Get your marketing in, know what you're getting into. And yeah, it's really fun if you're a hobbyist to just make whatever game you want. That's not what we're talking about. But if you want to sustain it, you really need to like, okay, I think this is the main thing is your pre-planning, knowing what you want to do and get the scope in and like your budget. Because if you're solo, your time is your budget, right? Even if you're not, you're paying yourself. If you're if even you got your wife, you got your family, you got your kids. Even if you're alone, you got to take care. You got other stuff you got to do besides game dev. You can't sit in front of the computer for 13 days. You 13 hours.
13 days, damn. That is hardcore. I think I
Okay.
broke Josh again.
Wait, so twice in an episode.
There we
Twice in a,
go.
I don't know. I'm gonna ask my wife. My wife might say, yeah, he's been on there for 13 days.
If you don't know the difference between 13 days or 13 hours, you may need to get help. You may
Right,
need to
right.
step away for a little bit.
That's a very salient point, Josh.
Yeah. And to piggyback off of that in terms of chasing trends, that I think again is another nail in Duke Nukem Forever. As we've said,
Yeah.
the market changes and it will change a lot over 10 to 12 years of development. What was, new and fancy in 2001 is old and done by 2005. And again, we've talked about how many developers get into that mindset of chasing that big game. I'm going to make the next Slay the Spire, or the next Vampire Survivors, or the next Darkest Dungeon. But you're living in a post-game release world for those genres. And unless you can do something, so many magnitudes higher or different, like I wrote in that piece, people aren't going to tune in.
Yeah. Like if you're lucky enough to have like Blizzard polish and to put it on it, right? But most people don't, right? Most indie devs don't have the budget. So yeah, definitely.
And to Malwinius's comment about waiting to release a game in dev when you are far, so basically kind of like in the early access route, or kind of what they did with Minecraft and Factorio. That, again, I think that has become a viable option today for certain games. Again, if you're making a linear 5 to 10 hour long game, early access is not the best.
Can't do narrative, right?
Yeah.
That won't work.
But again, something that has that kind of, I think, like sandbox or replayable appeal to it, that can work really well and can also be a great way to drum up interest and get people to support it early. Again, like Factorio was in development for, I think, at least like 8 to 10 years before it was actually released. And it was not on Steam for, I think, until like the last like 2 to 3 years of their cycle.
Wow. I should look more into Factorium. I was always Factorium kind of amazes me at like how big it kind of...
Yeah, and again, you can certainly do a lot, but those games figured out what their core gameplay loop was. Like, you don't release something that you still have no idea what your game's going to be to the public. Like, that's definitely a no-no. And it is, again, one of those many different aspects that you have to figure out, or you will pay the price in many different ways as a developer.
I think a good thing to do, right? Like, he was talking about like releasing, like when it's not really finished, when you maybe have a little bit to show. What was he asking?
About putting it on early access or releasing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even if you have like almost just above game jam quality or something, or if you want to test a mechanic, like there's no shame in like going into a Discord or tweeting or saying, anybody want to test out this real sandbox area? I got this real small area, just try a few mechanics, see if they work. Let me know. I mean, you'll always get a few people that are going to want to play, and test it out.
Yeah. But I would also clarify that if you're doing this should not be the time that you're doing major marketing for that project.
Correct.
And the reason why is that when you make that formal announcement, when you've got your name copyright or trademark, when you have the store page up, everything that's associated to that is going to come up when people search for it. And you do not want people to see, prototype 00001 when they search for your game, because that will be the oldest stuff, so it would have the most relevance in SEO. Now, if you want to show this off and, say, this is, game unannounced, or as when we were talking with Shark when his game was called Project Nexus, that if you want to have code names and do stuff like that, go for it. But
untitled name that's good.
But when it is time, when you are ready to make that big reveal, you have that name, that's when you want your game to be as polished as it can be. Because you don't want to say, here's my grand announcement, and 80% of the art is not done, all the screenshots look horrible, the game doesn't play right, there's hitching and performance issues even in the trailer.
Yeah.
That is going to start your game off on a foot that it may not recover from.
Yeah, please don't have performance fixes in your trailer, please.
So, yeah, again, and a lot of that comes like to Pony's comment about getting that understanding of game dev. Once on your first game, you will most likely make a lot of mistakes. It's going to take 2, 3, 4 times longer than probably somebody who knows what they're doing. We were talking about this, I think, last week, about if you're not good at something, it's better to get somebody who is amazing at, because what they can do in that time will probably be 1,000 times more than what you could do in that time,
Hmm.
if that ever.
Hmm. If you could even get close, like a smidgen of the quality that they can provide for you.
Hmm.
So again, that's just another thing. Don't forget, time is money. And so if you want to sit there and you want to learn something, it depends what it is. Just know your skills. Know your skills and be sure to reach out and get someone who's good at something if you're not good at it, because you want to do, the best that you can at it.
Yeah. And again, you want to be able to get this stuff out. As Josh just said, that time is money, especially when you're dealing with competitive genres.
Yeah.
Again, like first person shooter genre has always been highly competitive. Whether it's, the Dooms versus Call of Duty versus Battlefield versus so on. And if you are trying to compete in that space, you have to be able to keep up with it. And keeping up does not mean release one game every 10 to 11 years in that genre.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was
Uh,
actually thinking, like, if I wanted to release a shooter, how would I even approach that? Because that
mm-hmm,
market is so saturated, you know what I mean? And I know plenty of people, because it's a real, like, from a coding standpoint, it's one of those ones, like, it's platformer shooter, right? Those are two that are really easy to like code and get going. There's a lot of base
mm-hmm.
code in Unity and Unreal, even Godot. Like you can start from those. There's a lot of base templates, but I like how to stand out in a shooter genre is definitely, I think, would be hard.
I need to pitch a game design deep dive shooters, I think, next to the publisher.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, man. For real.
Exactly, Pony. Throw some city building in there as well to my dream idea. And yeah, again, it takes a lot to make a game of this high quality. And once somebody comes out and makes that, standard defining game, everybody else has to go beyond that. And if you're only working on one game at, over a massive amount of time, you're not going to be agile enough. And again, it's better to release like 3 or 4 games that have, different elements to it than try to cram 4 games of development mechanics into a single game.
Exactly. And actually, like you said, like having those mechanic, like, you want to do having the mechanics slimmer and not like everything cludging together, and you can say, okay, this is this type of mechanic I'm working on in this type of game, and then the other one. And so you can really like make it lean and really understand the mechanic, because if you're trying to throw everything together like you said, there's just too much stuff going on. And like, are you a balance machine? Do you know how to balance? You got a guy that's going to balance everything? You got it's got someone that's, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So
And again, what happens if you change your core gameplay loop
you
on
change your
top
core
of that?
gameplay.
So
You know
all
what? There's
those things.
new technology, something came out. I want to upgrade engines now. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
those are things you got to be very wary of.
Mm-hmm. And like we said, this is why you really need to be careful about these massive projects. And I think the point that I was going to say before I forget it again is that I think as a whole, I think game dev either has or needs to move away from colossal projects.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
again, when we say colossal, we're not discussing, a 3 to 5 year game dev cycle. We're talking 8 to 10 year plus. If
Hmm.
your game is changing console generations in terms of how long its development is in
Right.
for, something's not right.
Right. Yeah, I was looking over Duke Nukem and the console changes that they were having to make. And then at the end, they ported it to 3 consoles. So, like, when you're even thinking about just the amount of time it takes to
Mm-hmm.
port, right? It's just every little thing. And then to localize it, that adds more time. And just every little thing adds up for sure.
Mm-hmm. And to Pony's comment again, that's what we were saying with From Software. With kind of you can track with some of the best studios that evolution in terms of their design. That it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. Nobody goes from making a simple 2D platformer to their next game being 3D Souls like, open world. It
Right.
takes experimentation, it takes iteration. And it's why, again, that it's very tough when you're trying to make this as a business because you want to develop a reliable product, but you also have to keep pushing that
Pushing.
product
Right.
forward in some way.
Okay, so one of the things, right? One of the things about game development is you are trying to create like when we're talking money, it's a passive income. It's some we I've done it, it's created, and now it's out. So I don't have to actively like be there to sell the product. Someone can go and get it. So it's passively making money, right? So the thing is, if there's no product out there to make money, you're losing money. So the quicker you can get even small little projects out there,
Hmm.
and you 99 cent your first game, right? Like nothing, just little things out there. And the more games you have out, the more passive income you can create, the more you can expand your business,
Yep,
right?
and
The
we,
more longevity.
yep,
Jason, I think Burkett like was big on that, right? That was
mhm.
his big thing.
Yep, and again, like you can see when developers can make that very careful evolution. You don't want to make rapid jumps. This was something else I talked about a few years ago. This idea that some developers will go, they'll double down. They'll say, okay, if my first game is this, I'm going to do all of this for game number two. And either A, they don't have the market for it, B, they don't have the experience to make a game of that size, or C, it's all the above. And you
All of
can
the above.
squander so much revenue and goodwill. The Trine developers did just that. Trine 1 and 2, 2D, puzzle action games. Trine
Hmm.
3, I believe, went like 3D. I think there was like some microtransactions
Really?
involved with that.
No way.
And
Because I
the
love trying. The
yeah,
first one was so good.
and I think it almost bankrupted the studio with just how much it was negatively received. And
Wow.
again, very little has to go wrong for your game and for your studio to outright fail. And it's very scary to talk about like that.
Oh
And
yeah, they totally just changed. They went from a 2D platformer, they went 3D, which is totally possible. We were talking about that
mhm,
with Mario, right?
yeah,
Oh, but wow, yeah, totally mixed reviews on it. Didn't do very well at all.
yeah, and
Okay.
uh, Pony brought up Blizzard, and again, like when you're good at game dev, when you have that knowledge and that background, it can allow you to make really smart pivots. Look at Hearthstone. Hearthstone originally started out, I think the developer was just like messing around with making a CCG in his spare time or as a prototype. It turned into one of Blizzard's biggest sellers next to World of Warcraft.
Right.
But again, you don't just magically sit there humming at your desk and say, "I'm going to make Hearthstone" or "I will make
Hmm.
Gwent." It
Hmm.
takes knowledge. It takes having skills that you develop to learn this stuff.
And like he wasn't building it, like he had a whole entire lore, right, to
Mm-hmm.
take from. So he wasn't like building the lore and making the characters.
Mm-hmm.
He was just designing like the card mechanics, and right, and then all the stats are kind of already there because that's like innate in the game already. Like that's something that people know.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there was so much infrastructure already built for him to do that. He didn't just say, I'm going to make the best hard card game ever. It took a long time to get there.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at Gwent as well, Gwent originally started as
Went
just a mini game in The
mini game.
Witcher 3. And people really enjoy it. And they said, well, why don't we make this standalone? And yeah, Ratzel has a really good point there. For every Hearthstone, there's 100 prototypes. I mean, Double
Constantly seeing.
Fine, they have their annual, what was it, Amnesia Fortnite bundle or Amnesia Fortnite Game Jam, where they just, do whatever the heck they want for like a month or two. And, some of those projects are horrible, some of them are really good. And again, you never know what will be that game that resonates with people.
Right. And again, that's why I say I don't recommend chasing the trends because of that regard, because you don't know what's going to resonate with people in that regard.
Yep, and again, you don't know somebody else is making a game similar or even better than you.
Yeah.
If you,
Better, and
yeah,
it's going to be released 2 months before you.
or maybe a year or even several
You're
years before you, and you're
right.
still trying to figure out,
You've still been working on it for 8 years.
yeah. And again, this is why you have to be really careful when you're going to genres blind like that. That again, like with Bioware, with Anthem, that the studio never made a third-person shooter or action game like that before, and they thought they could just, take their skills and just have it automatically translate over. And it does not work like that. You have to do research, you have to understand the genre. And again, like we said last time, that the platformer genre is over 30 years old at this point,
Yeah.
and people still mess up making a
Right.
platformer.
In most egregious ways that you've ever seen. Like I
Especially
know
me.
you, especially yeah, I know you've seen them, and it's amazing, right? And so again, like just iterate, get those games out fast. Don't spend 10 years on that platformer. Get it done quick and move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Know your markets.
Play for them,
Know
exactly.
play exactly.
Yeah, and with something like Duke Nukem, that again, there was nothing I think we could say is wrong about that 2001 build. Like, again, it's rough, it's early, it's not finished, of course. But from a gameplay standpoint, like Josh said earlier, like, they probably could have had enough to make a full game in maybe a
Yep.
year or two tops from
Yep.
that point.
Yep, for sure. Like, because I was watching, I was scrubbing through some footage, and they had, I think, like at least 8 or 9 levels or 10 levels. They weren't complete, but they had mostly assets. You know what I mean? So just wouldn't have taken much to complete it. And they went on and Take Two took them to court for failing to produce the product. Is how long it took. And then it went through. There was like 4 or 5 different things, and the reasons we don't know, like we're not in there, we don't know for sure, but none of that should have happened, right? The game should have been released 2002, 03, get it done. And then who knows, they could have made Duke Nukem Forever 2, and that might have been amazing. Like that might have been like came out at a perfect time. They could have understand, but instead, like they kept with what was kind of another thing, side note about Duke Nukem is like the cultural references, how
Mm-hmm.
they didn't evolve over that
Mm-hmm.
time, and they kept it like it was still 96 almost in a way. And
Mm-hmm.
some of like the jokes that were made and how it was and shooters change, so
The
anyway,
market changes, what people
changes.
expect out of games
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
And
Mm,
I think the funny thing, of course, with Gearbox coming to finish it, that Gearbox was also the developer of that infamous Alien game, that the AI didn't work, and then someone figured out, like,
yeah.
what, like 10 years after the fact that there was a period instead of a comma that turned on the
Yeah,
enemy AI.
that's right, that's right.
Yep, and I mean, another good example, what was it? Not, the developer who did that horrible X-Men game, was it Silicon Knights? I think they did that. Like, again, game development is a process that, as a studio, you have to, you know, your stamp on your game is what's going to sell your studio going forward. You're only, as the famous saying, you're only as good as your previous hit. And if your
Hmm.
last game was horrible, it doesn't matter if it took 1 year or 10 years, people aren't going to want to see what you do the next time. And like we said, with Duke Nukem Forever and with games that get into these like multi-year projects, most often they don't end up being massive successes. Again, we've talked about people loving the underdog story. They love to hear that, oh, I spent 15 years of my life on a game and, I was almost on the street. But,
Hmm.
then it came out and now I live in Hawaii on my own private island. It's, the best game of, all time.
But that's one in a like,
Mm-hmm.
the chances of that, like the person was literally struck by lightning. That's a lot of luck and a lot of stuff that has to come together for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And not every game developer is that's not how it works for everybody. It only happens for a very, very small few. And then we focus on that one person and we
Mm-hmm.
think, okay, it's possible. But in the reality, we need to definitely temper our expectations and definitely understand that we're not looking. You don't want to get just like a one shot. You want to be doing this. Hopefully, you're in this because you love making games. You love everything about it. The art, the magic. It's beautiful to you. It's amazing. You live it. You love it. You eat it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you want to do is video games and make them, right? So like you want to keep doing it. You don't want to just. I'm not in to just cash out. Okay, I'm going to cash out Samurai Pig and I'm never going to make a game again. I'm going to make Samurai Pig, and then I already have my other games that I'm working on right now that are being prototyped and ideas that are being worked on and past. Like, you're always working on the next thing if you want to be in its sustainability. But again, I can't have my projects in forever perpetuity not being released in purgatory, right? It just not selling anything. People are gonna start labeling you vaporware. You'll get notarized for not releasing the games also, right? That's another thing. Like, these games are, if I'm looking at the list right now, a funny number one is Metroid Dread,
Mm-hmm.
16 years.
Yeah.
I, I don't. And Duke Nukem Forever's number two, 15 years. Mother 3, 12 years. Diablo 3, I think, is that the only one that did well? 11 years. Prey,
Yep.
11 years. Final Fantasy 15, 10. Team Fortress 2, 9, and then Last Guardian.
Yeah.
Right? So Last Guardian, Diablo 3, I think probably did well in sales. Team Fortress, of course. But majority of the other ones, those are just the top. There's going to be a bunch of other games that took just as long that no one's going to even mention. But
Mm-hmm.
those studios closed. They don't exist anymore. And they're just, dust in the wind because of that.
Mm-hmm. And when you are trying to make these games for so long, again, your reputation is going to be on that line. I think that's another thing that I think gets in people's heads. That I'm sure with 3D Realms, like they were thinking to themselves, we're like one of like the
Yeah.
top three, top five SPS developers of the '90s. We can't just make this little game, or it can't be just an okay game. We need to make, the next Doom killer, the next Quake killer. And again, it's one of those issues when it comes to the AAA space that you have to be really mindful of, how much you can put into a single game. And
Yeah.
again, like we hear these stories like EA demanding like Dead Space 3 was going to sell like 5 million copies. And I think this is another salient point that you shouldn't be going into this expecting to become, billionaires. You shouldn't be working on a game and thinking, oh, I'm going to release this game and then I'm done. You
Right.
should,
Like we said, the Rockstar
Mhm.
era is over, right? That's long gone now.
Yep,
So,
you need to think sustainably. And again, when you think sustainably, you're not. I think a lot of people again may look down on that as okay, I don't, so that means I'm just going to keep making games every day, or I'm not going to make $10 million off of my game. Why should I even do it? But again, you have to be able to put together a product and keep putting out products.
yeah.
And it takes time. Again, studios like Kid Fox, like Clay, like a Gray Alien, they don't just show up one day and are perfectly sustainable. It takes years to
Years.
develop a company branding, to get the quality of your game, and again to get that kind of,
The
I think we're
vibe.
using like vibe, that kind of
Yeah.
mood, or that
Hmm.
kind of like appeal of your titles.
Right.
And if you don't do that, you're kind of again your whole game dev cycle is just kind of like throwing dice and hoping that you get perfect sixes.
Right. And I definitely want to iterate. That's a good point. Is that this is like, yeah, we're not, you don't want to play casino in game
Mm-hmm.
dev, right? You want to play smart. It's a business. Sadly, it is a business, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we want to keep doing it, and we do. I know people are, oh, businesses, but that's how we feed our family. That's how we survive. That's how we can get, how I can pay my texture artist. How we, that's how like we can pay the coder. That's how everything gets done.
Mm-hmm.
Is you have to sell the product, and again, you have to get that product out, and again, don't take 10 years to make the product. Don't take 8 years to make the product.
Mm-hmm.
Get your core thing done. Am I getting my final point already? I suppose. Get
Mm-hmm.
your core point done. Get your core gameplay done as soon as possible, so you can start polishing, so you can start QAing, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
just no more long game developments. I think that is something we definitely, especially with technology the way it is today, we
Mm-hmm.
definitely need to be condensing the amount of time that we are working on games. Everybody's going to be happier. The employees are going to be like, cool, my work wasn't deleted for 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
Gamers are going to be happy that the game actually is released, right? They actually get to see the game. It's
Mm-hmm.
released. And then it's just great for the environment. We don't want to see nobody wants to be toiling over the same video game for that long. As game developers, we like to work on different things and move on. Like Rat Tail was saying, he worked on all kind of different genres. You know what I mean? So we have to be able to. I lost my train of thoughts there, but basically that's it, man.
Yeah. And again, that would also, I think, go a long way towards cutting down the costs of making a game. That
Exactly.
if you can make a game in 3 years versus making it in 6 to 8 years, well,
Exactly.
that will save some money. Because we've been hearing developers saying we need to raise prices of
We need to raise
games.
prices, right?
But again, if the consumer says, I'm not paying that, you're not
Because
getting.
yeah, because we do need to raise the price of gamers, but the amount of money that people have isn't getting raised either, right? Like
Yeah,
everybody's
everyone is
getting
suffering except for the
everyone's
publishers.
everyone except for the publishers is suffering, right? Like
Hmm.
except for a certain few, we're all in the same kind of boat. So condensing it smaller would definitely, like, again, benefit everybody. It would make people would be able to people we would have less burnout, we'd have less crunch, we'd have less turnaround. It would just better for everybody all around if we just were. It's like one of my biggest things that I want to propose is just that condense game development cycles. So
Hmm. And again, that means not chasing after these trends, not expecting, okay, Fortnite brings in this amount of money. We can make that amount in, a 2 year dev
easy,
cycle, or,
easy.
yeah. Or the whole horror story of Square Enix selling all their studios again to blockchain. And of course, this week has been really good for cryptocurrency, which
Yeah,
incidentally means I need to really rewrite the ending of my free to play book where I talked about my thoughts on play to earn and all that. So I need
right.
to tell them about that. But
Yeah,
again, it's that challenge of trying to release a game like this. You shouldn't be chasing after people. It is better, again, to make a product that you can stand by and get it done in a reasonable time frame versus turning every game dev cycle should not be, do or die, we're performing heart surgery and we fail, the patient dies.
right. Remember, someone can die, and that could be you
Mm-hmm.
working on that game, right? You could, like, neglect your health. You could, like, neglect your family and put everything into it in that cave for 10 years and never sell it. And that would just be a sad story that no one's really going to hear. The story
Mm-hmm.
that people will hear instead is you got that game, you got one game published in a month, you're working on your second game now, you're publishing in 2 months, you're working on another game, you're getting it published in 4 months, now you got a team together, you're forming a studio, people will
Mm-hmm.
hear that, right? So there's that.
Yeah. Uh oh. The good pony. Perfect. Throw me some of the residuals off of that.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think I'm about out of points as well. Again, I think we've kind of went around forever here with Duke
Right,
Nukem.
right.
But like we've said, smart game dev is oftentimes that, underlining aspect that leads to why certain studios succeed and certain ones fail. And again, in BioWare's case, they put out a failure of a game. Like, there's no denying that Anthem crashed, burned. And it
Super.
could have sank the entire company right then and there. And it has probably affected not only the reputation but the morale of BioWare for maybe, possibly for years to come after that.
For a while. Yeah, I don't think people look at BioWare the same way that they did back in the day.
Bethesda,
Bethesda as
oversee
well.
Project Red.
Oh, CD. Yeah, I mean, those
Hmm.
were like they were looked up to as the holy grail of giant
Hmm.
studios. Um, and now they've definitely fallen from grace. I'm trying to think. We've said the other studios, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're also looking toward indie because
Hmm.
it's definitely going to be where, as we said, it's not Indy's not considered garbage game, flash game. Indy is viable. It is something that people want. People love the ingenuity, the creativity, the agility, the humanness of indie game devs, you know what I mean, compared to a cold-hearted corporation that wants microtransactions from you. So we do have that regard, that in our.
It still kills me a little bit when someone says, AAA games been delayed. I have no other games to play, as I have like 10,000 games of indie to get to.
Yeah, I know. Some people act like AAA is the only space, and they never look into indie games. A swath of games are missing out on huge experiences.
And to, I guess, the point about like major studios, I mean, look at id Software. Like Doom 3 did not succeed for them. It was a decent game, but it wasn't, again, like the Duke Nukem Forever. It didn't completely sink the studio, and then they came back with Doom 2016, and then they blew it up with Doom Eternal.
Just exploded, right? Just amazing. And you kind of would have, if you would have been like an armchair, you'd have been like, Doom 3. That's all the studio has in them. I'm not sure what more they could do, and they just kept going. They kept iterating, pushing through with the formula, with what they know, and.
Look at Capcom. They had a renaissance over the last like 4 to 5 years with
amazing
Monster Hunter World, Resident Evil. And again, they thought, people thought, oh, another Resident Evil game? Who cares about Resident Evil 7?
Same.
Me too. And lo and behold. And again, it takes time, it takes studying, and it takes understanding the process to make these games. Again, titles that go on to define stuff, like Slay the Spire, Elden Ring, Doom, Resident Evil, and so on, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen, throwing things against the wall and all the colors swirl together and you magically get that game. It takes years, and it takes understanding this process, and you cannot shortcut this stuff. That's the thing. Like Pony asked me earlier if I want to make a game. I do, but at the same time I also realize that even with all my knowledge, there is no way that my first game is going to be the next, Super Mario World or the next Prey. I'll do that in 2 weeks. I'll write a book in 1 week. I'll make the game the next week.
Do the same week, Josh. Do the same one.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't work like that. And a lot of the stuff that goes into game dev, like we said, it's not something that can be taught. At least not at the level, I think, that goes into the professional setting. You can teach people, again, what makes a good platformer. You can teach them, how to code in Unity or Unreal. But you can't teach someone how do you manage a team of 10 working on a 2D platformer while also creating a brand new art style. Oh, and you also have to do the marketing on top of that. And you should also be cutting some trailer footage. And, and by the way, you also, something's wrong, you figure this mechanic doesn't work, so let's just rebuild this platformer. Or let's just turn this platform into a first-person shooter. It's just that simple.
Multiplayer first-person shooter, or an MMO.
Exactly. All first games should be MMO quality or higher.
That's it. Don't even try if you're not making an MMO, man.
So, yeah, exactly. Or Josh-like.
Josh-like, yeah.
But I think with that incredibly useful tip for all the new students watching this right now, MMO Deck Builder, we can wrap things up for this week. So, again, as always, thank you everybody for tuning in. Do the liking, subscribing, commenting. If you'd like to suggest a topic for a future show, let us know in the comments or on the Discord. If you want to follow all the stuff that I do, there are links down below, and Twitter, Patreon, and Discord up there in the top right.
And all the links will be down below. Working on Samurai Pig. My Twitter link's down below. Just follow me there. And I stream game dev, and I'm on here, so come check me out.
And as always, we'll be doing these shows Saturdays starting around 5 p.m. ET, so be sure to tune in. And I guess that one final point from Winnie is, again, timing is everything. Just making sure we're on time for our shows, making sure we're on time for streaming, and making sure you're on time for your projects.
And consistency.
Exactly. So, I guess that's all I have to say. You have any final points to throw in?
I could probably regurgitate everything again. Yeah, let me regurgitate again. Let's any new developers that are looking at it,
Mm-hmm.
not sure what to do, not sure, start small. Get your core gameplay done. Don't fit
Mm-hmm.
square pegs in round holes. If it doesn't seem to work, either let it go, or maybe don't spend long iterating on something that is just a little prototype. Get a prototype done, core
Mm-hmm.
gameplay, see how it works, get something released on itch, move on to the next thing, right? And
Yeah.
start understanding the whole process. How do I market? How do I
Mm-hmm.
talk to people? Hey, what about publishers? Is that, what about how do I tweet? How do I Reddit? Get all that stuff done. For I beg of you, condense your game
Mm-hmm.
development schedule. Figure out how to do that. That's proper planning, proper team management, and you will get there. All
Mm-hmm.
right. I think that's it.
Yeah, and I think that's a far better point than my thing about making MMOs. I think it's a far better point to end the stream on. So,
We should have left it at making an MMO as your first game.
all right. So, everyone, thanks again for tuning in. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where it's in the art and science of games. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and see you next time.